was in the United States a lot of times during this last 3 years. I would like to use this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to people in the United States for your support and to you personally. Thank you that you are with us. I know a lot of citizens of the United States who help us, who not just in solidarity, but doing something. I'm very grateful, and I know that we survived because of you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ukrainians will never forget who was with us in this very dangerous time.
In dark time.
But let me finish that in these dark times, we all together was on the right side of history.
Hello. Our guest this week is someone who is quite impressive, Oleksandra Matviichuk. She is a lawyer. She is a representative and a voice for Ukraine. She investigates and documents war crimes and human rights violations. For her efforts, she and her team won a Nobel Peace Prize. They are the first Ukrainians to achieve that honor. So obviously, there's an awful lot to talk about here on all sorts of different topics. And we approach them with the professionalism, the compassion, and the dignity that they deserve. But we also step away from her work and talk about how this war is affecting all of us in so many profound ways. I know that you will find something in this discussion that will move you or inform you. So, Oleksandra, thank you so much for coming to visit us here. I know your schedule is very busy, so I'd like to start our conversation. You started your career fighting against Russian abuses of civil liberties, notably during the Maidan, which I was on as well. Tell me a little bit about your experience in pushing back against Moscow and the abuses of civil liberties in Ukraine.
Let me tell you two things at least. First, when we speak about Maidan, it was in time when millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against pro-Russian, corrupt, and authoritarian government who stopped Euro-integration process. And for people in Ukraine, it means not just stop of Euro-integration process, it means that we have to return to Moscow sphere of influence. Before this, Russia organized trade wars in order to prevent Euro-integration, and this decision of Ukrainian government was made suddenly when President Yanukovych met with President Putin in Sochi. So for Ukrainians, it was obvious that it's not just stop of Euro-integration process, it means that we return to Russia fields of influence. And that's why millions of people came to the streets and they peacefully demonstrated just for a chance to build our own country, to build our own country in a way that everybody has to be protected, government accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And we paid a rather high price just for this chance, because government started large-scale prosecutions against peaceful protesters. I know what I'm talking about because I launched civil initiative which was called Euromaidan SOS. We brought up several thousands of people, and every day hundreds and hundreds of protesters who were beaten, arrested, tortured, accused in fabricated criminal cases pass through our care. So second, what I want to say, that from that time, I know when you can't rely on the law, when you can't rely on the international system of peace and security, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking in the categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have a much great impact that they can even imagine. And being in Maidan, we faced with the entire state machine. Criminal groups, titushki, they cooperated with prosecutors, with police, with the courts. The former president, government, security service, and majority of parliament were against peaceful protests. They weren't liquidated, even physically. And in this situation, it was so easy to say, but what we can do being a people, we are not God. How we can stop this repressive state machine? But even taking our example, being one of hundreds of among initiatives which was created based on self-organization during the Revolution of Dignity, our lawyers, our volunteers, they fought very honestly for each person, for each procedure's measures, because we provided legal assistance, like the lawyers exist. And we suddenly start to work not on the legal level, but on the symbolical level, on the level where ideas and senses emerged. And everyone knows that there is no guarantee. You can be beaten, you can be arrested, you can even be killed. But there are people who will fight for you, who will never leave you alone, who will try their best to release you, to help you, and will take about your family. And this understanding provides people throughout the country a courage to overcome the fear and continue the struggle for freedom and for human dignity.
We see it happening today on Rustaveli Street in Tbilisi, in Georgia, the legal protections, trying to get citizens to defend or have defense against the state. So I think Maidan set an example for that. Then in 2021, we're jumping ahead a little bit, you were nominated to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. And we talk about all the things that the state did during Maidan, and we talk about what's happening in Georgia. But what Georgia doesn't quite have that we have here is the occupied territories. We know that torture is happening inside Russian-occupied Ukraine. What are you hearing about torture inside occupied territories? What kind of treatment are Ukrainians receiving at the hands of the Russians when Russians occupy and take their land?
It's a good question to explain what's going on in occupied territories, because I know constantly travels with work in meetings abroad that some people, even from good intent, think that the war is so horrible that probably occupation is better. At least it's better than war. But unfortunately, it's not true, because occupation doesn't decrease human suffering. Occupation just makes human suffering invisible. And for majority of people, occupation is not the end of human suffering, it's just the beginning of human suffering. When the Russians occupied territories, they imposed terror against civilians in order to save control, because it's one thing to occupy the territory, but another task is to save control. And that is why they physically exterminate active local people on the ground: lawyers, journalists, children writers, musicians, teachers, environmentalists, priests, any active people of community. And I personally interviewed hundreds of people who were legally detained, tortured, and released. And they told me horrible stories. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon. So let's be clear, despite political reasons, there is no justification for such kind of actions. Because there is no legal reason in doing such things. There is also no military necessity in it. Russians have done this horrible torture and sexual abuse only because they could. And let me return to one point which you start with your question, because I think it's also good reflection of the general picture, why it's still going on during 11 years of the wars. Because let's remind that this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, with occupation of Crimea and part of eastern regions. And in 2014, 2015, we sent numerous reports to UN, to Council of Europe, to OSCE. We try to communicate with different governments what's going on with people in occupied territories, that people live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. But frankly speaking, nobody was interested. And that is why this evil multiplies and Russia started large-scale war. So return to this fact that I was nominated to UN Committee Against Torture in 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
I failed because the candidate who was nominated by Russia won this competition. And this is tell us something about ourselves, because it was competition. States voted, and they decided to vote for a person from Russia. The majority of states voted for a person from Russia, regardless of that fact that Russia institutionalized torture in Russia itself, in occupied territories, regardless of the fact that Russian human rights defenders told about horrible cases against Russian citizens themselves. So this shows that something wrong with us as international architecture of peace and security, that having the possibility to choose Ukrainian human rights lawyer or Russian expert, the majority of states voted for Russian expert.
Yeah, we hear all the horror stories from Mariupol, from from towns and villages, and then to ignore it, it's frustrating. You have called for a tribunal to hold Putin and Russians who engage in these abuses to account. What are your hopes that Russians, and in particular Putin, will be held responsible?
Let me first explain why we need to create special tribunal. In March 2022, I started to ask to myself, for whom we document all these crimes for? I refused to evacuate, so I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city, and with a part of my team, we continued the work on the ground, and we faced with unbelievable amount of crimes. And for me, it was obvious that we face with accountability gap. And this gap have different dimensions, but one of them is that there is no international court which can prosecute Putin and top political leadership and high military command of the Russian state for the crime of aggression, for their leadership decision to start this war. Because all atrocities which we are documenting, it's a result of this leadership decision. And we have to punish them for their leadership decision to start aggressive war against Ukraine. And in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such precedent. It was Nuremberg trial, where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed. All other international courts, which you probably heard, like tribunal in Yugoslavia or in Rwanda or special court in Sierra Leone, I will simplify it, but it was where court where people were tried because they killed each other not according to the norms. So if they killed each other according to the norms of international humanitarian law, they will not be prosecuted. So that's why we need to put the war of aggression behind legal frame. And that's why we need something like Nuremberg in 21st century. But once again, Nuremberg, it was victorious trial. And we faced with another problem, how to convince political leadership of different countries that in 21st century, we have to make justice independent on the fact when and how the war will end. That in 21st century, we must move further. We cannot wait. We must establish a special tribunal on aggression now and hold Putin and his surrounding accountable. And when we start to speak about it, and first time when I publicly raised this issue, it was May 2022, it was sound very naive because it was something which never happened before. But now, just a month ago, approximately 40 countries expressed their political will to create such a special tribunal, and now we are on a stage to make agreement with Council of Europe to create such special tribunal in the frame of Council of Europe. So something which was sound like naive idea just 3 years ago now become our reality.
A lot of things have changed from 3 years ago. Our reality is generally changed. And I want to follow up on what you've just said, but before I do, I have to ask you, slightly perhaps a personal question. I've spoken to the people who lived through Bucha. I've visited the graves of Izium. Mm-hmm. I've spoken to torture survivors and prisoners of war who've come back after an exchange. These are horrible stories. Horrible, horrible stories that even someone who has covered wars and conflicts for 20 years, it chills me. It disturbs me. I have trouble sleeping sometimes. How do you tackle, especially since these are your countrymen, the trauma of what Ukraine is going through?
It's a difficult question to answer because there is no proper answer. I have a friend, she's a Ukrainian writer, and she told me that living in Ukraine in large-scale war means that you're always up and down. Because we're people. Even me, being a professional lawyer, having an experience to work on the ground with war crimes for 8 years before large-scale war started, knowing this international practice and standards and situation in other countries, I was unprepared for such unbelievable level of cruelty. Mm. Because something which we're documenting, it's not just beyond the legal norms. It's beyond my imagination what humanity is about. For sure it's difficult because we are documenting not just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions, we are documenting human pain. And sometimes you have this feeling that even to be near this pain, listen to the stories, this pain can burn you out. But what helps me keep moving, when I just start my documentation work, I start with this legal practice of detention and sexual violence and torture against civilians. And we have a questionnaire. And in the questionnaire, we have a question, did you apply for help to national legal enforcement bodies or for international organizations? And quite a lot of people answered no. We didn't apply, and we don't want to. And I asked the follow-up questions, but why? And they answered me that, you see, we have no hope that our perpetrators will be arrested and punished because they can move to Russia, even if these territories will be deoccupied. So for what we have to spend our time and to speak with these international organizations or legal enforcement bodies. And then I asked them, but you came to me and you tell the story. And it was 11 years ago when I suddenly understood that even those people who said, we have no hope, still have it. A tiny hope that, yes, we don't expect justice, but if it happened, we want our story to be recorded. And that's why they decided to come not to legal enforcement bodies, but to Ukrainian human rights organizations. But still they have a hope. And they tell you a story which they refuse to tell to police or very often to their families.
Yeah.
And it's a huge responsibility.
I'm sure it is.
It's a huge responsibility to bear these stories, thousands of stories, and to be this hope, this tiny hope for people. So I have no right to give up.
Sadly, this is the story of Ukraine. This is the Holodomor. This is the Second World War. This is the barbarity of the Soviet Union and the KGB and the NKVD. There's something unique in Ukraine, I think, and maybe it is the trauma. I don't know. But on a happier note, there's something unique about you when it comes to Ukraine. You are the first Ukrainian or part of a Ukrainian organization to win a Nobel Peace Prize. You were part of one of the founding members of the Center for Civil Liberties, and that eventually got a Nobel Prize, which is the first, as I understand it, the first Ukrainian. That must be very humbling for you, but it does beg the question, if you're getting a Nobel, where's the rest of the international community? Do you think that you're getting the Nobel was a highlight for Ukrainian recognition on the global stage? Does more need to be done? Where do you see, great to get a Nobel, but where's the further recognition?
We received the Nobel Peace Prize during the war, which sounds like irony.
Yeah.
And we just mentioned before that this war is very bloody and this war is very cruel and millions of people are suffering. And I think the decision for Nobel Committee was the following, because for decades, the voice of human rights defenders from other parts of the globe wasn't heard. Because for decades, we're told that Russia is a threat, because Russia destroyed their own civil society step by step. Putin regimes killed Russian journalists, jailed Russian activists, dispersed peaceful Russian demonstrations. For decades, Russia committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Libya, Syria. But for decades, even developed democracies closed their eyes to this. They continue to shake Putin's hand, to build gas pipeline like Germany, to do business as usual. And Russians start to believe that they can do whatever they want. And this Nobel Prize finally make our voice tangible. Because human rights and peace are inextricably linked. State who grossly violate human rights and attack freedoms, such states is a threat not just to their own citizens, but to the peace and security in general. Because only existing of free world always provide as threats for authoritarianism that their leaders lose their power.
Well, I think sadly, the international community is so terrified of the threats from Russia that they would like to close their eyes, ears, and like the old saying is the ostrich sticking his head in the sand and just saying, make it go away, and it's not going to go away. You met, to rewind a bit, back in 2014 in the immediate aftermath of Maidan, I believe it was, you did meet with then Vice President Joe Biden. And if the recording of that meeting is correct, you were asking him for more weapons and support to defend Ukraine. Are you still of the opinion that the best way forward for Ukraine is that they are properly armed to fight this war and hope, and with the aspect of winning this war?
For sure, solution is much complicated because we have to think about short-term and long-term strategy. In the short-term strategy, the problem is that Russia doesn't want peace. Putin started this large-scale war not because he wanted to occupy just more part of Ukrainian land. It's very naive to think that Putin started large-scale war and lost hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers to occupy Bakhmut and Avdiivka. I'm sorry. It's not Rome. It's not Geneva. It's not Washington. It's not Berlin. It's important for Ukrainian cities, Bakhmut and Avdiivka, but majority of people in the United States and in Russia itself, they can't find Bakhmut and Avdiivka on the map. Putin started large-scale war because he wanted to occupy and destroy the whole country. He wants to move further. He sees Ukraine as a bridge to Europe. He dreams about forcible restoration of Soviet Empire. He cares about his legacy. His logic is historical. And that's why majority of Western intelligence and leadership before large-scale war started, they can't believe that Putin will start large-scale war because they don't understand this historical logic, that Putin don't care about human lives. Human lives is the cheapest resources in the Russian state. And the problem is that even after 3 years of large-scale war and 11 years of war as such, Putin doesn't refuse from his goal. So this is a reality which we have. And if we want to stop Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, we must demonstrate strength. And part of this demonstration is provide Ukraine the proper instrument to defend itself. Because Russia is still moving. They imitate negotiations, but they intensify rockets and drones attack even to peaceful cities. And just recently, they killed in Kiev region a mother, and she protect her small son just with her own body, and it's happened every day. It's clear evidence, and Putin laughing against President Donald Trump attempts to establish peace. He just wants to achieve his goals. But so from the short-term perspective, we must demonstrate strength to stop Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. But it's just a short-term perspective because we have to also think about long-term perspectives because we need sustainable peace. And it means that we have to develop a strategy towards Russia. It's something which we lack for current moment. It's Russia who was always proactive. Russia committed something horrible, then presented it to the world like fait accompli, like new reality, and push international community to reckon with it. So for decades, we live in a world where Putin set the rules of the game. And that's why we failed, because we always was reactive, not proactive, but reactive. And this means that we need to create a strategy, what we will do with Russia in the long run. Because we just can't pretend that Russia does not exist. Russia has 140 million of people live in poverty. You know that Russian army, they stole washing machines from villages from Ukrainian houses in Ukrainian villages. We have a joke. So if you came for washing a machine, please give us address. We will send them. And these 140 millions are very poor and very militarized. And they see a war as a sense of existence. So what we will do with that? They have nuclear weapon. They have oil and gas, which means they will still have money to produce rockets and drones. They have their partners like North Korea who send them troops. They build this authoritarian alliance with China, with Iran, with North Korea, as I mentioned before. So what is our strategy for a long run? We need responsible political leadership who have developed such vision in a long-term perspective. Short-term, to stop Putin with strength long term, what we will deal with it.
Well, one of the problems that you alluded to it there is one of the problems is that they don't care if they're poor as long as the empire is strong. They don't care about their own individual rights. They care about the power and the strength of the empire. And we'll talk about that as we draw to a conclusion. But first, you talk about building a new Ukraine. What kind of country would you want to build, here in a new Ukraine?
When Revolution of Dignity started, a lot of sociologists start to do their work, and they ask people for what they are fighting for. And for sure, ordinary people, they have no idea about European Union. They know that we start this Euro integration process, and for them, it wasn't joining to some interstate organization. It was value choice. And that's why they described their vision in the words of values. They tell that we want our government to be accountable. We want our courts to be independent and to conduct justice. We want that everybody in this country will be protected and their rights and freedoms will be guaranteed. We want student demonstrations don't be beaten in the center of Kiev. So we want respect to human dignity. We want our freedoms as a people of this country. So it was language of values. And we still in this fight. In this meaning, Revolution of Dignity is still continuing, especially taking into account that when we got our chance to build such a country, even I will say so, to work hard to build such a country, in order to stop us, Russia invaded. Mm-hmm. Russia occupied Crimea in 2014 and part of eastern regions, and in 2022, Putin extended this war to the large-scale invasion because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom, which came closer to Russian borders. And for this 11 years, we have to do two tasks parallel. We have to defend our country, our people, our democratic choice from Russia, and parallel to conduct democratic reforms, which is very difficult to do during the large-scale war, frankly mm-hmm. speaking, because people in the United States spent centuries to build sustainable democratic institutions. We have just 11 years.
Yeah.
And we are doing this not just during peaceful time. We are doing this in the time of large-scale war.
Now, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't bring up some other things. And I love Ukraine, but I love Ukraine warts and all. So I have to ask the question that as an advocate for civil liberties, we're under martial law here in Ukraine. We have been under martial law, which was voted upon by the Rada legally. But there are critics in the world, especially those who are supported by Russia, who say that Ukraine is not living up to these ideals of civil liberties. There's not been an election. There's criticism of the mobilization tactics, these things. What is your response to the critics who say that Ukraine is also not supporting civil rights?
Sorry that we are not ideal. And please point me the ideal country. We are a nation in transit. We are a nation in transit. Just 11 years, we lived under pro-Russian, authoritarian, and corrupt regimes. And as I mentioned, we spent these 11 years for fight for our existence, in parallel trying to do democratic reforms. We have a lot of problems. It will be honest answer. We have a lot of problems as a young democracy, as a nation of transit. And I also criticize a lot different government decisions, or we and our colleagues criticize a lot our government that they're not doing ambitious things and concentrate on some internal issues. But we understand also that we are stuck between two logics. The logics of the war, which dictate some issues just to survive, and logic of democratization, which is our goal because we define our victory in an ambitious way. We want to build sustainable democratic institutions. And this logic, it's two opposite directions, because logic of the war dictates centralization. For every country in the war, logic of democratization dictates decentralization. Logic of the war dictates limitation of rights and freedoms due to security requirements. For example, we have curfew. Logic of democratization dictates that you have to expand the space for rights and freedoms. So we balanced with these logics, having a lot of problems and doing good things and doing mistakes at the country. And human rights organizations are very vocal about these mistakes and wrong decisions, and we criticize it because we're still a democracy, even being a large-scale war. We have a right to criticize our government. So it's not a good or bad situation. It's a very complex situation. But what is important, that we are on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
We are on the right track. And this track, it's not artificial. It's track which was underlined by Revolution of Dignity, by very sincere actions of millions of people who stood up their voice and tell, we want freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And we will fight for freedom. And if it happens, we will die for freedom, because we want freedom, even not for us, but for our children. And once again, it's not words for Ukrainians. Now we are proving it in a battlefield. Because in this war with Russia, we are fighting for a freedom in all senses. For a freedom to be an independent country, but not Russian colony. For a freedom to preserve our identity and not to be forced to educate Ukrainian children as Russians. And for a freedom to have our democratic choice and to have this hard work to implement our democratic choice.
And when we, as we kind of draw to a close here, and when we talk about the war, I think you're right when you mentioned earlier this desire for just the war to end. We're also tired of this war. I'm tired of this war. I suspect you are tired of this war. My colleagues, my friends, we're all tired of this war.
Putin doesn't tired of this war.
Putin
This
is
is
not tired
problem.
of this war. But despite the exhaustion, the idea of leaving people behind in the occupied territories to live under Putin, how do you reconcile that with the need for the true development that you talk about to begin, which will only come when the peace happens?
It's a very hard question for Ukrainians, because how people abroad look to this situation, they tell, but just give up these territories. Just give up these territories to satisfy Russia's imperial appetites. And the war will stop. The problem is that the war will not stop. We have the previous experience when Russia occupied Crimea and part of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and Ukraine has zero chance to release these territories. Did it make Putin stop? No. How he used 8 years of peace agreements, which was concluded in Minsk. Putin built powerful military base in occupied Ukrainian territories. They prepared the economy for a possible way of sanctions. They trained their army. They developed the plan of invasion, and they start large-scale war. Because Putin don't need just part of Ukraine. Putin needs the whole Ukraine, even more, not just Ukraine, as I mentioned. So Russia is empire, and empire has a center but has no borders. Empire always tries to expand. This is the nature of empire. And majority of Russians have this imperialist culture, and that's why they support their crazy government.
Где заканчивается граница России?
Граница России заканчивается через Берингов пролив с США.
Граница России нигде не заканчивается.
So probably other people abroad can afford themselves visual thinking, but we can't. We have to be realistic about real goals of Russia, because we are dying.
Yeah.
So we have to see and understand clearly what's going on. But return to your question. Being realistic, we have also to understand that for current moment, we have no military potential to release these territories. It's sad but true, but it's all only for current moment. And we will never give up from these territories. Because for us, for Ukrainians, it's not just fight for territories, it's fight for our people. We are fighting for people who live there. It's our people, it's our families, it's our relatives, it's our neighbors, it's human beings. We can't leave them alone for torture and death. Do you know that 1,600,000 Ukrainian children living in these territories? Russians forcibly erode their identity. They prohibit them to speak Ukrainian language. They have to start each morning in school and sing the Russian national anthem. Their parents are forced to give their children to so-called sports and re-education camps, where Russians teach Ukrainian children how to use weapons. They wear military uniforms, they march. And Russians are preparing a new generation of Putin's soldiers from this 1,600,000 Ukrainian children. We can't accept it, because it's not just human rights violation. It's not just threat for Ukraine. It's very naive to think that Russia is preparing the new generation of Putin soldiers from this 1,600,000 Ukrainian children just for war with Ukraine.
And they'll grow up and they'll turn their weapons against fellow Ukrainians.
Not only. They will go and fight and die in any country which Russia tells them to go.
Well, I just have two more questions because I know your time is valuable and limited. But this does bring me to the question of, okay, so look, he has to strategically, to regain control of the Black Sea, he needs Odessa. And good luck with that. I've been to Odessa several times during this full-scale invasion. I love Odessa. They're lovely people, but they are stubborn people. And there is no way in my mind, I've seen the defenses. But that's a separate issue. Kiev, do you ever see a government in Kiev that will be friendly to Moscow? Is that something that's possible? Because that's the other thing he needs to achieve, Putin.
Probably when a lot of time passed, the new Russian government will accept all horror which their people provided to Ukraine. They paid reparations, they released these territories, the international order will be restored, and after this huge process of reconciliation, someday it can happen.
I'll tell you why I asked that question, because I was on Maidan with you. You were there as well. I wasn't with you, but we were both there. And I remember something changed. I mean, you could feel it. We're not going to be a colony again. We're never going to submit to Moscow again. I have a poet friend of mine, Anastasia Dimitruk, who wrote her poem «Никогда мы не будем братьями».
Никогда мы не будем братьями, ни по родине, ни по матери. Духа нет у вас быть свободными. Нам не стать с вами даже сводными. Вы себя окрестили старшими? Нам бы младшими, да не вашими. Вас так много, а жаль, безликие. Вы огромные, мы великие.
It seemed to me that it was a break that could not be resolved.
Look, your question is not about Ukrainians, your question is about Russians. Because in order to have a normal civilized relations, we have Russia to be changed. Russia has to become a democratic country, and their people have to find Russian glory not in forcible occupation of independent countries, not to be okay with killing people there and erode their identity. They have to find their glory in Russian ballet, in development of their country, in something else. So it's not question for Ukrainians, it's question for Russia. Russia will change? And now we return to this long-term strategy, which starts with a short-term strategy. And let me tell you two things, because it means when you ask, do you think that Ukrainian government will have a good relation with Moscow? It's the same question, will you forgive people in Russia for everything which they are doing? But it's very difficult even to predict that in nearest years they will ask for forgiveness. Nobody asked. Nobody tells sorry. We are sorry that we invaded your country and killed your people. I can't even predict that it will happen just in nearest years, because majority of Russians are satisfied. So it's not question to Ukrainians how we can forgive someone when something don't even ask for forgiveness. It's question for Russians. Or
recognize their guilt.
Sure, and mean responsibility. Because even if it wasn't you who came to Bucha and rape people and torture people there, it was done on behalf of your name. So it's about historical responsibility, which was brightly described by Hannah Arendt, by Karl Jaspers during the Nazi times. But let me return to the story which I want to share, just to trying to express my thoughts about this difficult question, about this long-term strategy, how to make Russia democratic, and in short-term strategy, how to stop Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. So I don't know the answer for the first question. It's need a long-term strategy, and the problem is that nobody thinking about this long-term strategy. But what I know for sure, that when I ask my Russian human rights colleagues how I can help you, because you know that human rights organizations in Russia are prohibited, part of Russian human rights defenders are jailed, part of them left the country, part of them still working, trying to do something and help people, Ukrainian legally detained civilians, Ukrainian prisoners of the war, Russian citizens who protested against the war and were persecuted because of this. So when I ask them how we can help you, they always responded, if you want to help us, please be successful. That's all. Just be successful. Because only success of Ukraine and military defeat of Russia, like the ruination of Putin's plan to occupy the whole country and go further, it provides a chance for democratization of Russia itself. Okay, it's not a guarantee, but in our life, there is no guarantee at all. It's a huge luxury to have a chance. For current moment, Russia has no chance to become democratic. I can't even predict that in nearest years, someone from Russian government will say, please excuse us, please forgive us. We understand our responsibility. But after success of Ukraine, it can push Russia and Russian people for the very difficult reflections that probably in 21st century, it's not okay to invade another country. That probably in 21st century, it's not okay to kill people and erode their identity and to implement your genocidal intent to destroy the whole nation, to take their children, to ban their language, to rob their cultural heritage. Probably it's not okay to do such things. So we need to demonstrate success because Russian people can't tolerate war criminals being their president, but they will never tolerate loser war criminal.
Too true. Now, I have heard from the diaspora, the Russian diaspora who are outside the country, this voice of regret. We've spoken to people on the show here who have expressed that, but they're free to do that because they've left Russia. I know I lived in Russia. I have friends who are there now, and they can't speak openly, even though I suspect they hold real serious guilt. But I'm hoping for my friends in Russia that what you describe will happen, and that through a defeat in Ukraine, they will finally look in the mirror and make the changes, which, ironically enough, many of them already know. I'm going to ask you one last question. And you're a lawyer, you're a spokesperson and an advocate for your country, and you do it exceptionally well, and it's been awfully kind of you to spare some time to come and talk with us. I'm going to ask you kind of a philosophical question. Now, you're an advocate for civil rights and civil liberties, but there is a movement in Russia that has existed for centuries, that exists now, that is resurgent after the fall of the USSR, of this idea that inalienable human rights are not true, that they're not. You aren't born with rights, as we believe in the West, and particularly in the United States, that you must earn your rights and that the state must give you, that it is the state that gives you rights, not that you are born with rights. So you're like a pig or a chicken in their view. Tell me a little bit about that philosophical divide, which makes Ukrainians and Russians two completely different people.
Nothing new in this approach, which unfortunately became to dominate in Russia. It's a basis for all authoritarian regimes. Look to this authoritarian coalition: Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. They're very different, but they have something in common. All these regimes, they have the same idea what a human being is. They see people as an object to be controlled, and they deny them in their rights and freedoms. Democracies, in opposite, even not being ideal, once again, there is no ideal country, they see human rights and freedom to be the highest value. And there is no way to negotiate it. Because, once again, I will repeat it, that only existence of free world always provides a threat to dictators that they will lose their power. Because it's ideas. The ideas has no limitation in national borders. And even people who live under authoritarian regime someday decided that they want to be free. Because we have this natural intent to be free. And this intent is very strong in Ukrainian nation. And I think that for Ukrainians, freedom is not self-determination value, it's a value of survival. Because if we will not be so stubborn in our intent to be free for these centuries, Russia will destroy us as a nation.
The dream of Ukraine is not yet dead. First stanza, I'm paraphrasing, of the national anthem, and how true that is. You have been a wonderful guest. Is there anything before I let you go that you would like to tell my audience, to anybody who may be listening?
I think it's a good opportunity for me to say that I was in the United States a lot of times during this last 3 years. I was in different regions and different corners of the country. And I always face a very warm welcome, regardless with whom I speak, with students, with religious community, with business, with general public. And I would like to use this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to people in the United States for your support and to you personally. Thank you that you are with us We all know how last 3 nights was difficult, being under this massive attack of drones and rockets. I know a lot of citizens of United States who help us, who not just in solidarity, but doing something. I'm very grateful, and I'm slightly emotional because I know that we survived because of you. Because your support, your solidarity, and support and solidarity of other people in different countries who said when large-scale war started, we don't care that Russia is a great country. We don't care that Russia has nuclear weapon and veto power. Those things which they are doing in Ukraine, it's not just legal, it's unhuman. We have to stop it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ukrainians will never forget who was with us in this very dangerous time.
In dark time.
But let me finish that in these dark times, we all together was on the right side of history.
We have something in common, even if the rest of the world doesn't know it, even if the American people don't know it, we have something in common, Ukraine and the democracy, the Republic of the United States of America, and that is a love of liberty and freedom, self-determination, and democracy. It's tough, it's difficult, it's hard to get in the case of Ukraine for your struggle, and sometimes it's hard to keep in the situation of the United States. So, Oleksandra Matviichuk, I appreciate your time. You've been a wonderful guest, and thank you once again.
Thank you for invitation.